Welcome back to Power of Storytime. I'm Kate, the creative director of Calling Card Books and Z Girls Press. Every Wednesday at noon we read some of our books, and we'll potentially be talking to authors as well. So if you have a book that you'd like to talk about, or if you're an artist as well, let us know. We'd love to chat with you. And today we are starting Finding the Lost, which is the sequel to The Passage at Moose Beach by author Michael Foster. In the first book, if you weren't along with us earlier, we read through all of the book during earlier Power of Storytime, so you can go to our website, or sorry, not our website, you can go to our Facebook page or our YouTube channel to watch those, and they're also available on Michael's website, which is michaelscabinbooks.com. There's 6 or 7 episodes and interviews with Michael talking about what inspired him to write the book, about the young early readers who gave us feedback on the book and came to the book launch. So there's all sorts of interesting stories that we've shared there if you haven't seen that yet.
And voices.
And voices, yes. There's a lot of characters in the first book, and when Michael came on and read with us, he had some truly fantastic voices for all of them. This is Michael, and the book was inspired by a family cabin that they have up in the Cascade, or the Boise National Forest in Idaho. And so this is him at the cabin. And so to start off, since it's a new book, we are going to read some reviews that it's gotten, just to whet your appetite before we jump in. So the first one is from Forward Clarion Reviews, which is a really well-known reviewing institution, essentially. And about this Finding Lost, they said, "Resilient and resourceful, Alicia packs a bag, heads into the wild. Alicia packs a bag and heads into the wild. Witnessing her self-sufficiency on this solo quest is a delight, especially as she discovers her own strength along the way. Alicia builds fires, forages, and fishes like a true survivalist, opening opportunities for young readers with the possibilities that she represents. Even more inspiring is the perseverance of her spirit. Knowing it's up to her to save the day, Alicia never ever gives up, even when a myriad of disappointments come her way." And that's part of why we love Alicia, because she's adventurous and always willing to overcome obstacles. It's Alicia. As you can see, one of the obstacles that will come up in the story is on the cover. No spoilers. All right, and then some of the other reviews we have are from the students that we talked about. The first time around, it was Mr. Malone's 7th grade class that read The Passage at Moose Beach and gave us feedback, and we had like a session with them where they were able to talk to Michael and ask all their questions. And so for the second book, a few of those students returned to become early readers again from their 8th grade English class. But Mr. Malone also had some of his new 7th grade class read as well, so they were able to join in on the fun and give us some early reader feedback. So this is what those students said. "The fact that I had finished the book made me sad. I had gotten emotionally attached to all the characters because the book was so captivating." And that was Katrina Smith, who is one of the 7th grade students. "I like the plot of this sequel. It doesn't seem too forced and makes sense considering the first book. This book left me satisfied. The problem was solved sufficiently, yet still left me wanting to read the next book. And the writing of Alicia's inner thoughts and general descriptions helped me to connect to the characters and the stories." And that was from Emily Burrows, who is an 8th grade student who also read Passage at Moose Beach. "The characters come to life because they took these fictional characters and really gave them life by allowing them to talk and feel." There's those voices we were talking about. "But when you have a talking tree, some wouldn't believe that it's a real thing. But we're in the wild side. Anything can be real." And that's from Brianna Lopez, who's one of the 7th grade students. "The ending felt like I had been going on this adventure with them, which made me really sad when we had to leave Tawny and the wild side. But through her power of connecting to people, she was able to get back..." Oh, spoilers. I'll skip that line. "The strongest theme of the story is to always look to your friends for help." And that was Andrew Silva, who is another one of the 8th grade students who helped us with the first book as well. Or, early read the first book. And this book, again, was illustrated by the very talented Gloria Miller-Allen. So we've got some beautiful chapter headers and maps and full-page illustrations you'll see. The first one, this is a map that kind of shows the journey that Alicia will be going on. And it is based off some real places in the forest near where Michael's cabin is. They've been made a little bit more magical and fantastical in this book because they've got some stories behind them. But let's see. It starts at Alicia's cabin, and she makes her way several places, including Thunderbolt Mountain, the Vulcan Hot Springs, the Silver King Mine, the swamp, the remains of one of the dearest, most beloved characters from the first book, Bristleback, Grand Tree, who is the villain in the first book and has a role to play in this one as well. Moose Beach, which is where the first book began. It's the beach where Alicia disappears when she's spending the afternoon with her father. And the Sleeping Giants, which are the relatives of Bristleback, the hills that look like giants that have just gone to sleep. So, with that, we have the map of the cabin / the wild side. We'll go ahead and start finding the lost. Moose Beach Trilogy Book 2. Alright, so this is the prologue. Let's got that right there as well. Alicia awoke with a start. The crackling boom of thunder rumbled through the woods as rain fell loudly against the roof of the small cabin she shared with her mom and dad. She listened intently, trying to understand what had disturbed her sleep. The cabin was silent except for the sound of rain and the soft snoring of Richard and Katie. What was it that had startled her awake? The thunder came again, and it was and with it the faintest of words. Alicia, come, danger, broken, come find me. She strained to make out what was being said, the dark words drawn out and echoing just behind the booms. But the thunder was fading now as the storm moved on out of the lake valley. Alicia laid her head back on the pillow. She fought to stay awake, listening, but her eyelids slowly closed with the weight of sleep. It was just her imagination, she was sure. Strange dreams brought on by too many s'mores from the night before. But as sleep began to reclaim its hold on her, her thoughts returned to that beach and the adventures she had had there several years ago. And then we have Chapter 1, Breakfast. Alicia opened her eyes to daylight coming through the window. The smell of cooked bacon hung in the air, pleasing her nose and bringing her fully awake. Lifting her head, she looked around the cabin and saw her dad tending a skillet on the wood-burning stove, the heat of which filled the cabin and chased away the chill night air. "Good morning, sleepyhead," Richard said. "You're waking up late this morning." Alicia had a faint recollection of the disturbing dreams that had given her a restless night. "Did you hear the thunder last night?" she asked. "Nope, I must have slept right through it," he replied. "You snored so loud I could barely tell the difference," she remarked. Alicia looked over at the clock, noticing it was after 11. "Why did you let me sleep so late? You know I need to work on my report for next week." For Alicia, this was a vacation in name only. While the family tried to grab as much time as possible at the cabin during the summer, their visits were becoming more and more limited each year, with both parents working harder than ever. Alicia herself was focused on her education and didn't have the time to explore like she used to. Getting ready to enter high school was a big step, and during her orientation open house 2 weeks ago, her future English teacher had assigned an end-of-summer report that was supposed to describe what she had done on vacation. It was due on the first day of class, which meant there was homework before she had even started high school. Unbelievable! Alicia had written similar reports when she was younger. "During my summer, I went camping with my family and caught frogs." This one, she imagined, would have to be much more detailed. She was entering the gifted program and expected that her English teacher would want something a little more academic, especially now that she was going to be in high school. High school, can you imagine? New students, new friends from all different grades and schools. Instead of one teacher, she would have several. She was excited to learn about advanced math and sciences. There would be boys, of course, but there was always time for them later. Much later, if her father had any say in the matter. Alicia still had her mind set on the possibility of being a botanist or a forest ranger, so it was never too early to watch her GPA and start prepping for college. "You just looked so comfortable, I couldn't bear to disturb you," Richard said, smiling over at her. "You've been focused so much on the upcoming school year, even at the cabin. I thought you could use the rest." "You're probably right," Alicia admitted. It was a Saturday after all, but a feeling of anxiety trickled in the back of her mind. "School starts in just a couple of days, though." The teenager loathed getting out of bed, leaving the warmth of the blankets behind. She could almost see the cold air seeping through the cracks between the logs of the cabin, spilling over like water and to a puddle to swirl around the floorboards. Putting on a show for her father, she crawled out of bed with loud grunts of protest and looked around the cabin. "Where's Mom?" "Oh, you know, that being the last weekend we're going to spend here, she was eager to get out and enjoy the outdoors," Richard replied with a wistful look on his face. "I'm sure you can find her working on one of her drawings nearby. She already grabbed some oatmeal, so it's just you and me for breakfast." Alicia's mom, Katie, had become quite the artist of late, and many of her sketches, drawings, and watercolors were featured at a local gallery back home. She was beginning to receive a lot of commissions for new pieces of art, and the extra work kept her busier than before, which meant less time spent here at the lake. Katie always felt more inspired from her time at the cabin than anywhere else in the world. It was common for her to run out just after daybreak to try and find the best early morning light for her work, when the sun's rays shone through the tree branches just so, providing a crisp color palette to work with. The nature-loving woman knew that after the rain last night, much of the dust would have settled, giving everything a cleaner, sharper appearance. Alicia moved towards the great metal stove, arms extended in the direction of the radiating heat, and shuffled like a zombie for comedic effect. "I had the strangest dream last night," she said. "Someone was speaking to me, and it felt urgent, but I can't recall their words right now." "Too many s'mores?" her father chuckled as he watched the antics of his daughter. "That was my exact thought," Alicia laughed at the memories of the night before. She had been having a lot of fun making s'mores, toasting the marshmallows from a campfire and using willow branches her dad had carved into long pointy sticks to stab the puffy white blobs and hold them close to the glowing coals. Then she would pile on graham crackers with pieces of chocolate and smush them down. Her parents just sat back and watched while she ate one after another, occasionally making one for them as well. Thinking back on it now, she was amazed at being hungry for breakfast this morning with all the sugar she consumed, but Alicia felt ravenous. Standing in front of the stove, absorbing the warmth, Alicia reached her hand skyward and stretched up on her tippy toes for a moment, giving an exaggerated groan in the process. The teenager had grown rapidly over the past year, changing from a skinny young girl into a taller, still skinny, but athletic young woman. The growing pains she occasionally dealt with were no joke. It felt wonderful to stretch her muscles to the fullest as they adapted to this new body. She slowly lowered her arms and relaxed back down onto her feet, walked over to the small kitchen table, and flopped herself down onto one of the old metal chairs. She was ready for its final cushion that her bare legs would stick to, anticipating the delicious bacon she had been smelling since she awoke. Alicia glanced at the dark purple backpack sitting propped up on the table, almost tipping over from the weight of the textbooks inside. She couldn't believe the number of books she had to carry around. Alicia knew she would have to dig into them shortly, but for the moment, she pushed the backpack hard, needing two hands to slide the heavy thing to make room for the breakfast plate her dad was now carrying to the table. She could get to the report after eating. "What you doing today?" Alicia asked her dad as he set the plate down in front of her, along with a large mug of hot chocolate, perfect for warming up on this chilly morning. She took a piece of bacon from her plate and dipped it into the egg yolk before taking a slow, savory bite. "We definitely need some wood chopped for the stove," he said, sitting down across from her. "The summer's almost over, and mornings and evenings are cooling down quite a bit. I don't want to be chopping wood in the rain and snow." Alicia looked at her dad. He worked so hard and just cooked her breakfast. She absolutely hated the task of gathering and storing firewood, but she appreciated the food and felt she should at least offer to help. The fact that her dad would probably be calling for her in an hour anyway meant that if she volunteered first, it might earn her credit for a favor in the future. It felt like a good plan. "If you need help stacking it later, give me a holler," she said, now dipping the half-eaten strip of bacon into her hot chocolate. "I'm sure I'll need a break from this report at some point." "I might just do that," Richard responded, looking at his daughter like she was an alien, watching her odd eating habits. "You just take care of what you need to do, my soon-to-be high schooler." Alicia looked up from her plate of food and saw her dad smiling at her with that all-too-familiar pride in his eyes, and wondered what she had done to deserve such attention. She felt a touch of embarrassment from his gaze. Maybe it was from the fact that over the past year or so, Alicia had been spending less and less time with her parents and more with her friends, adopting their personalities, blending in with them on her own. All this attention from her dad felt weird now. She was a different person than the one who would jump from her father's shoulders into the lake. The idea made her a bit sad now that she thought about it. The focused youngster used to be very active outside, exploring and playing games of make-believe. She no longer had time for make-believe, instead focusing on her education and taking it seriously. She admitted to herself there are times when she missed those adventurous days from just a few years ago. "Your mom will help with that whenever I need," her father continued. "You focus on that report." Moving slowly, as if not wanting to be caught, Richard picked up a piece of bacon and cautiously dunked it into his coffee. Alicia pretended to be focused on her breakfast, sipping hot chocolate, and peeking up as her father lifted the strip of bacon and bit off the end. He immediately made a horrible face. Alicia erupted into laughter so hard that hot chocolate flew from her nose. "Dad!" she screamed through her laughter. Richard saw what had just happened to his daughter and began laughing himself as he watched her grab for a napkin to wipe away the cocoa running down her upper lip. They finished their meal with small talk about the upcoming school year, smiling at each other, still giggling. Alicia glanced once again at the backpack and groaned. This was one of her favorite parts of the year, when the colors of the forest stopped being uniform green and new shades of orange and yellow added to the mix. The pollywogs had lost their tails and grown into frogs by now. There was a new batch of young squirrels collecting the last of the summer seeds to store for the winter. She resigned herself to that. As much as she wanted to get outside and explore, there was simply too much schoolwork to do, and she should have gotten started on it already. Richard pushed his chair away and reached over the table to grab Alicia's now empty plate as well. She watched him carry the 2 plates into the kitchen and gave everything a good rinse, knowing from experience that ants could become a nuisance if the plates were left dirty. Not forgetting for a minute that the smell of food could attract bears, though not usually in the daytime. "Thanks, Dad," Alicia said. "That was delicious. You know how to make perfect eggs." She loved her father, but their conversation and interactions were more infrequent as her priorities shifted. Friends were her favorite influence lately. They understood her these days more than her family did. She had never really talked with her parents about what happened 3 years ago during the rainstorm on that beach. How she had crossed over to the wild side for 2 whole weeks. Her father had said that she had simply disappeared for about 15 minutes. She was sure he believed it to be some imaginary game that she had been playing, hiding off in the woods to give him a good scare. And in some way, she resented that. It seemed that adults never took kids seriously. She knew differently, but also realized it would be impossible to convince either of her parents what she knew happened back then. So she didn't bring it up anymore. Her memories of Mickey, Briar, and Fiona were starting to fade away a bit. Alicia watched her father as her father finished with the dishes and grabbed his jacket to go out and work in the cold morning air. Through the corner of her eye, she saw his familiar final glance in her direction as he opened the cabin door and stepped out. I wonder who he watched before I was born, she thought, as she slid the backpack in front of her with a sigh and reached inside to take out her notebook. She settled in for a long afternoon, never knowing that she would not be helping her father stack wood that afternoon, if ever again. The next chapter is Frozen in Amber. Alicia reached for her mug, absently taking a sip before noticing the liquid inside was now watery and cold. Most of the chocolate had already settled to the bottom. Feeling a strain in her neck, she looked up from her homework and realized she had been at it for hours. What time was it anyway? She'd expected to hear her dad come in and get her when he needed help. Now is as good a time as any to take a break. Standing, she stretched her back, which was cramped from being hunched over the kitchen table for what felt like hours, in the same position. "Ugh, that feels good," she thought, rolling her shoulders around the little cabin. Alicia did love this place, with its walls made of real wooden logs which were polished smooth to the touch. The old wood-burning stove was her favorite piece of furniture. Years ago, long before she was born, a mouse had the unfortunate timing of running along one of the beams near the ceiling, right as the new cabin was settling. It had gotten its tail caught between the beam and the roof. Unable to move, with no one to hear its squeaks of despair, it died right there in the rafters during the long winter. Now, decades later, the corpse of the old mouse still remained, mummified, just far enough out of reach that removing it would be more effort than it was worth. Instead, and perhaps somewhat morbidly, her family left it there, where it was called the Watcher of the Cabin. Most of the time it was not visible in the darkness of the log roof crevices, but if you knew right where to look, you could spot it. The family considered it a sort of totem or good luck charm, keeping the bad spirits away. She glanced up, spotting it hanging there along with a few remnants of old, dusty cobwebs. Poor mouse. Alicia regretted that she didn't have the time to enjoy the place as much as she wanted to this weekend. "I guess that's part of growing up," she thought with mild regret, glancing at her textbooks. "But I suppose I should get out at least once today." She opened the door and stepped onto the front porch of the cabin. The rain from the night before had soaked the ground, and now in the warm afternoon air, the scent of pine and wet dirt was rising, giving the air an earthy aroma. It was one of her favorite smells in the world, rich and damp, the same smell that emanated from digging up earthworms to use for fishing, so she took a moment to enjoy it. The cabin and surrounding woods were a home away from home for Alicia and her family. A welcome break from the busyness of living in a city. Here the air was fresh in a way that she could almost taste. Occasionally a passing car or ATV would kick up clouds of dust from the roads, and at night it was so clear that you could see billions of stars like cream spilled across the sky. Located in the state of Idaho, their log cabin was set in a narrow valley in the Boise National Forest, and stood on a small hill overlooking a beautiful lake. The lake was only about a mile wide, and maybe 2 miles long, thoroughly perfect for floating in an old inner tube or paddling a kayak. When the air turned cooler and the sun began to sink behind the trees, the older folks would get in their rowboats and head to the northeast corner of the lake, where lily pads grew, and where the best spots for fly fishing were. It was the best spot for fly fishing, as the rainbow trout, the second thing Idaho was famous for, the first being potatoes, loved to hide beneath the wide, round, floating leaves of the lilies, patiently waiting for a stray insect to buzz too close to the water. The fishermen would come home moments before it was completely dark, their wicker creels loaded with the evening's catch. Alicia looked along the clearing behind the summer home to the neighbor's house, which was far enough away that each cabin owner had their own privacy, but not so far that they were strangers. In fact, the family there had a daughter of their own who just turned 17 last month. Despite their age difference, their shared experiences at the lake and in the cabin bonded them in friendship. That cabin stood empty now, as did many of the other homes around the lake. The family staying there had been in the process of packing up and leaving for the summer, just as Alicia and her parents were arriving. She barely had time to run over and give the older girl a quick hug, saying goodbye and wishing each other the best in the new school year. knowing they wouldn't see each other until next June. Over the years, Alicia had made friends with several of the children whose families owned places in the area, but it was late in the season, and most of the vacationers had returned to their homes before the weather turned cold. The rhythmic sound of chopping wood that she had heard earlier, chack, thunk, had stopped as Alicia went to look for her mom and dad. Following the small path around the side of the cabin to where the chopping block and woodpile were, she saw no signs of her family, but noticed a quite large pile of split logs and kindling waiting to be neatly stacked. I guess they're taking a break, she thought to herself, or perhaps wholly distracted by the beauty of the woods and the promise of a refreshing dip in the lake. She circled around the side of the cabin, her family nicknamed the enormous rectangular hunk of stone Chipmunk Rock. They would place fruit rinds and peanuts on it, and the squirrels and birds would flock to snatch up the tasty treats, chattering loudly and angrily at one another. Alicia and her parents would laugh, watching the small creatures play, and point at their curious antics. But sometimes lately, in secret, she would look at the giant stone and remember a friend she once knew, all too briefly, causing moistness to fill her eyes. On the other side of the boulder, and just beyond the edge of the woods behind the cabin, Alicia saw her mother. Her mother had found something interesting to paint. Her dad was heading over to find out what it was and admire his wife's work. Looking at her parents, the teenager felt an unexpected surge of love race through her. Alicia knew she was lucky in more ways than she realized. The girl continued towards them, also interested in seeing what her mom was drawing. Getting closer, she saw that her mom was completely lost in thought. Alicia could see that her concentration was so deep, Katie wasn't moving at all. Maybe her mom was drawing a squirrel or something and didn't want to make any sudden movement. She appeared to be completely frozen in place, her pencil extended toward the canvas as if she was holding her breath, waiting for precisely the right moment to begin her drawing again. There was a strange shimmering in the air around her, which could simply be a trick of the light from the shadows cast by the slowly swaying tree limb above, or moisture rising from the wet ground as it was heated by the afternoon sun. But it also triggered a faint memory in the back of Alicia's mind, one that she couldn't quite latch onto at the moment. Watching her dad approach her mom from behind, Alicia heard him calling out, "Kate?" Richard asked questioningly, soft so as not to disturb her. "Kate?" Richard reached out gently to rest his hand on his wife's shoulder, but moments before touching her, he stopped moving as well, afraid to disturb his wife's work. Alicia paused, waiting to see what was happening, but her father only stood there, his hand inches away from her mother's shoulder. "Dad?" she inquired, walking towards them. "Dad, what is it?" Alicia approached her parents, both of them standing completely still. They were certainly fascinated by whatever it was they were looking at. Perhaps they were examining the source of the distortion in the air. Stepping closer, she saw the shimmering intensify for a moment, and then stop, as if space and light within were holding their breath. She noticed a glint of something hovering there, surrounding her parents like sunlight on a soap bubble. A great fear clutched her stomach unexpectedly, and she rushed forward towards her parents, reaching for them and calling, "Mom? Dad?" Suddenly, her outstretched finger slammed into nothing. Alicia stopped, pulling back her hurt hand and shaking the pain. "Ouch, that hurt!" She reached out slowly with her other hand and felt a cold, curved, smooth surface where there should have been none. What was this? Slowly, Alicia circled her parents, keeping her hand on this bubble of air which seemed to encase her family within its cold sphere. Like insects in amber, she could see her mom and dad, eyes open, staring at nothing, unable to move, and caught by something they never saw. The fear had begun in her stomach, radiated out, raising the fine hairs on her arms and neck. Alicia slapped her hand hard against the invisible surface and felt a sting of pain in her palm. "Mom? Dad?" she shouted at them, but there was no response. "Mom! Dad!" she screamed at the frozen bubble, slapping it over and over. The pain in her hand had finally become too much, so Alicia stopped, leaving her hand resting on the sphere, which was cool to the touch and soothing against her reddened palm. She slowly collapsed to the ground, her hand sliding down the surface of the bubble, and to her mouth in open shock. She felt confusion rush in. She didn't know how this could happen. What sort of weird phenomenon was this? She'd never heard anything like it before. Not ever. Alicia felt helpless. She watched as her friend drove home only the day before and knew that most of the lake people had gone. Alicia had no one she could go to. A growing sense of panic settled into her chest, causing her heart to race. Looking down, she began scanning the ground with her eyes, finally settling on what she wanted. Alicia stretched to pick up a large, jagged rock. She viciously slammed it against the invisible barrier, repeatedly, once again screaming for her parents to respond. "Mom! Dad!" she yelled over and over, the rough edges of the stone cutting into her palm and fingers, leaving red streaks on the rock and a clear bubble encasing her parents. Alicia sobbed, filled with frustration and confusion, pounding the stone against the barrier. What sort of magic was this? Magic. Suddenly, she paused in her bashing, and her thoughts flew back to the events of 3 years ago. Magic. She didn't know what this was. She didn't know how to free her parents, but she remembered, and she knew one place where she might find the answer. So that is the beginning of Finding the Lost. And if you would like to learn a little bit more about the author Michael Foster, or about either of these books, or see the wonderful book trailer we have for Finding the Lost, you can go to michaelscabinbooks.com. I'll give you a little tour. If you want to grab your own copy, all you have to do is click that button there and you'll be able to purchase the book. And this is the trailer, which gives you a little taste of the things to come in the book. We won't play it now, but go visit michaelscabinbooks.com to read it, or to watch it. We also have little descriptions of each of the books, and if you click the Read Now button just here under each of the book cover images, you'll be able to read the first few chapters for free. So definitely check that out if you've enjoyed the reading, and if you want to continue on ahead a little bit, you can read a little bit of Passage at Moose Beach and Finding the Lost for free, or purchase copies of the book or ebook if you'd like to. There's also some reviews. This is from, this is actually the quote that we read earlier from Forward Reviews. And also, if you haven't joined us before, all of the videos from Power of Storytime about the Passage at Moose Beach and the interviews with Michael are all up on the website, so you can watch them all there and catch some of the earlier readings. And Michael was also interviewed on the author's show, so he reads a little bit of a passage from Finding the Lost and talks a little bit about the book and the writing process. So that's a really interesting listen if you want to find out more about the book. And these books are also available at all of these great retailers, so if you don't want to purchase through our site necessarily, it's available pretty much everywhere books are sold online. Yeah, and then more reviews. Michael also has a blog, so you can read some interesting posts about what inspired him to write the book, a little bit about his cabin and his childhood growing up, and different things that have kind of gone into his writing or his writing process. He's got some interesting stories about some death-defying things that happened to him as a teenager, so definitely check out his blog. He's a wonderful writer, and he's got some really fun stories in there. Yeah, and there's also a little bit about the first book. Some of the proceeds are going to the Wildland Firefighters Foundation, so this is a little bit about them. And there's also a bit of information about Gloria Miller Allen, who is the artist who did all the beautiful artwork in these two books. So yeah, definitely check out the website. There's a ton of great stuff on there about the books and about Michael, so it's a great place to go and learn more and watch all of the earlier Power of Story videos, Power of Storytime videos. So yeah, definitely check that out. We're so glad you joined us. We're so glad you joined us. Come again next Wednesday at noon. We'll be continuing reading. Thanks for watching.